And welcome back. This is Steve Gillmor, and this is the Gillmor Gang for Friday of 8 days before the iPad. And I'd like to welcome back to the show, all the way from Legs on Sale, or something approximating that anagram, Los Angeles, Danny Sullivan. Welcome, Danny.
Thank you.
What's the weather like down there?
It is very, very sunny and warm and hot.
Oh, that's a bulletin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
If it's news, it must
We've had
be.
lots of rain.
You have? Oh, well, that's.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was just kidding, but I guess not. Also from a warm and hot place, although distinctly right-leaning. This is from the group known as the people who didn't support the health care reform bill. Andrew Keene. Welcome, Andrew.
What did you say about right-leaning?
We got into that last time. So those of our
So you admit you repeated yourself.
Those of our audience that are pre-board can now move on to our other British guest. Yes.
Hello there.
From the state of Ribbit.
Yes, and it's warm and sunny here too in Mountain View today.
The golden tones of Kevin Marks. Welcome, Kevin.
Nice to see you. Actually, I can't quite see you, but I'm hoping that's just my end.
You can't see us, huh?
I got a freeze frame of Danny.
Oh, interesting.
Sorry, Kevin.
That's not good. Well, we'll proceed nonetheless. And somebody who can't see anything at all because he's driving at 75 miles an hour over the Bay Bridge. Robert Scoble. Welcome, Robert.
More accurately, we're stuck in traffic going through the toll gate. It's a beautiful day out here in San Francisco, at least.
Excellent. Okay. So we've got 8 days to go till the iPad. Danny Sullivan, are you getting excited, were excited, or aren't excited?
I bought one. I'm bummed that it'll arrive like the day I go back to Britain for a week. So I was looking forward to just carrying it around and looking cool. I don't know. I'm looking forward to actually them just arriving, and I'd like to get a month or two into it so that we could, maybe get past how the iPad's going to save the world and actually see what it does and see how big of a change it really is. I still want to try to understand why this is going to be better than my laptop and how revolutionary it's really going to be, but it'll be cool. I'm looking forward to reading some stuff on it.
Steve, waiting for me at home is a new Toshiba laptop that has HDMI, a wireless HDMI connector, so I can play video and pictures from my couch. It'll be interesting to see if the iPad is as cool as that is.
You got to be kidding me.
I have to get you going somehow.
And I guess that's Rocky laughing in the background appropriately.
No, Rocky's sleeping.
Oh, okay. So, who is it who you've got in your posse that's laughing?
Oh, that's me.
Oh, okay. So you seriously suggest that the tablets on the order of what's been shipping for I don't know how many years from Microsoft are going to?
No.
Sorry.
No, I'm not. I'm just trying to yank the chain because that would make the show a little bit more interesting and maybe wake Rocky up. Now he's laughing.
Okay. Kevin Marks, do you think that the iPad is a big deal or a little deal?
I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think Scott Rosenberg wrote a very good post today about how all the newspapers are basically building CD-ROMs all over again in their iPad demos and thinking that suddenly there's this magic shiny technology that will save them by giving them a new place to sell things. And I think that rings very true for me from what I've seen of the demos so far. And the assumption that people will pay many dollars a day or many dollars a week to get a sort of animated newspaper on the iPad seems like wishful thinking of the strongest orders to me.
Okay, well, I'm going to disagree virulently with that, but first, Andrew Keene, what do you think?
About the iPad?
Yes. And welcome to the show, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much. I don't know. It's hard to tell. I always hope Kevin's wrong, but
Just in principle.
he may not be. I think that the idea that this device will mean that suddenly everyone will start paying for newspapers is unimaginable, especially since the first people who buy them won't be the kind of people that the newspapers are looking for anyway. They're not going to either save or kill the newspapers.
You don't think it's going to save the newspaper? Well, first of all, the reports are that both the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal will have versions of their product by default on the day that the iPad ships, that there may be some revisions to the software over time, but basically they're going to go out. The price quoted in the Wall Street Journal or somewhere for, actually it was in the New York Times, the price quoted was $17.99 a month for the Wall Street Journal.
Well, so what though? I mean, just because I don't know.
Well,
just because they got it doesn't mean everyone's going to buy it.
I think that there will be healthy sales of both of those publications on day one of the iPad.
Well, so what? What's your point?
That it's going to further extend the notion of a national or international newspaper, that it is going to lock out...
well, give me an example. You said that now. Give me an example of an international newspaper that it's going to further develop, you say. Which one?
I love it when you're, so strong and demanding. Both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times are in the enviable position of controlling the first and second read in whichever order of extremely valuable part of the marketplace, which is the business and business-focused entrepreneurial user.
Well, that may be true, but you said that it would develop it internationally. I mean, the iPad's not even coming out internationally. So it's not as if the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times are going to get international subscribers through the iPad. And it doesn't change the nature of the newspaper. Newspapers are still kind of parochial. New York Times is a very parochial newspaper. Wall Street Journal slightly less so. The most global newspaper is the Financial Times. I don't know what their iPad strategy is, but I'm not sure if they become more or less global because they're on the iPad. Their content is global, not their marketing strategy or how they present that information.
That's correct. But, once you have incentivized and provided an economic rationale for an authoritative stream, there's basically nothing stopping you unless somebody else can come along and supplant you.
Well, let me give you an example of where I think it could work. As you know, I live in Alabama, and I was very disappointed when I came from California to Alabama that I couldn't get the Financial Times, which was my primary newspaper. So if the Financial Times was available with bells and whistles on the iPad, I would pay for it. But then again, I'm not sure how typical I am as a consumer of wanting the Financial Times in Alabama, whether there's a real mass business opportunity there or whether I'm just slightly odd.
Well, I think you are slightly odd, but I don't think that
Me?
that's orthogonal to what you just said, which is that which is that it's going to be difficult for international brands to materialize.
But the product itself has to change, right? You can't, and I think as Kevin,
I reject that notion. That's what I was going to push back on what Kevin had to say. I think that the idea that this is going to be about multimedia suddenly finding a rationale in the newspaper and magazine space is nonsense. I think this is about.
Well, I suppose we're in agreement then. That's good. I mean, that's what I was saying, is that suddenly they build all these demos that are saying, no, we can add video to your newspaper.
Well, of course they're going to be
like Harry Potter.
They developed interactive TV with voting on games in 1943, but that doesn't mean that it worked at that point. It did work now that we've got Foursquare, you're voting not only on what you think, but on what your location is. There's all sorts of metadata that's surrounding these objects that, what I would call gestures that are floating around the network, and they're being aggregated and collected into trending information and used to create a new form of search. Right, Danny?
Yeah, I mean, you can do that with the metadata and you can apply it. I just don't know how much it's going to make a difference sort of in terms of the newspapers and making a difference on the iPad. To me, one of the challenges I think that the iPad will... There's this idea that the iPad is somehow going to save newspapers because of what? I don't know. I mean, what's the problem that's been going on with newspapers? Is it that people have just literally not wanted to pay for having one delivered to their doorstep? I get the Wall Street Journal each day. It comes to my doorstep and it's great. Sometimes I read it when I have time, sometimes I don't. So now I'm going to get an iPad and I'm going to subscribe to the Wall Street Journal because I suddenly have more time to read it each day. And if I wasn't buying the hard copy version, why am I suddenly deciding that, oh, well, you know what, now it's worth the $18 a day, a month, or whatever for me to be doing?
Well,
I don't see that just because you take a newspaper and shove it onto an electronic device, it suddenly gets any better.
But hang on, let's go back to where you actually started, which is you subscribe to it every day, right?
Yep.
Okay, so if you had an electronic iPad version of that, do you think that you might read it?
If I'm sitting around and I have time.
Well, I mean, when do you have the time to read it on paper?
I usually read it on paper when I'm in the afternoon. I usually have lunch and I like to sit outside, take a little break from the computer and read some newspaper articles then. And then sometimes after dinner, sit out on the patio and read it for a half an hour then as well. Now, because of my work, I'm constantly reading articles throughout the day on my computer, period, right? So that's where I get most of my news content, actually. My reading when I'm away from my computer is almost for pleasure. I'm reading stuff that's not about search or tech. But the reading habits, my reading habits will be different from somebody else's reading habits. If you look at the traditional newspaper reader habit, it's I got up in the morning, I'm having my coffee, and I want to read the newspaper. Well, why did I suddenly start wanting to read it on the iPad? Or I may want to read it on the iPad, right? Because now it's easier for me to sit it next to my coffee where I might have had a newspaper. But if I wasn't taking the newspaper in the first place, why did I suddenly decide I needed to take it on the iPad?
But, there's this logic that I think is faulty, which is that this is about gaining new markets right now. It's not. It's about replacing the existing market with something which you can then use to upsell and cross-sell. I mean, you've got this this device which not only gives you access to the same and perhaps expanded content, but it also gives you the ability to be able to swipe over, notice that something's going on in your email or in Yammer or whatever business backbone is signaling you, and be able to continue doing this kind of thing. The idea, I think, that the fundamental thing that I think you said there, which I think you're sloughing off, is the idea of doing something for pleasure. I think that this is going to be a very pleasurable environment. I think that people are going to steal bits of time from all parts of the day and night to use this device. And
I can agree with that, but it's so if I'm curious and I want to catch up on the news, I'm my sister. I'm not a tech guru. I'm not a big newspaper reader or whatever, but I got an iPad for Christmas, or I got an iPad that was given to me. I decided I wanted to get one of these things. So now I got this iPad, and I'm thinking about all the stuff I want to do with it. And I'm looking at it, and oh, look, it's been, delified, if you will, with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal on it already, and I can get that for free probably for 30 days or whatever. At the end of that, I'm going to find that content that compelling that I'm going to shell out $18 a month for it, on top of all the other subscriptions I got going on. I think that's going to be a very small audience.
All right, so here's
but for pleasure, what am I going to do? You know what? I might be checking out the Google app that gets me Google News that lets me read a lot of stuff out there for free. That I can totally see happening. And I can totally see happening that I'm downloading some books that I want to read in the way that people would be buying them for the Kindle or whatever. But that's a lot of money for news content.
But I think that I think you're not recognizing the way that markets form.
I think that
hang on a second. I think you're not recognizing the way that markets form. There is going to be a significant population, whether it's for good reasons, silly reasons, or whatever, who are going to. I mean, I already pay for the Wall Street Journal. I think I have the online subscription to it, which is, I don't know what it is, $50 or $100 a year. And I never read it, except that it pays off occasionally when somebody in the blogosphere or in the Twitter sphere points at something and it goes to that item and it's not behind the paywall, or it is behind the paywall and it opens up. Or I'm on the free page and I click on related content and I go right into it. So that's how I consume that. Do I want to transplant that to an experience for $17, $18 a month, particularly given the fact that there's nothing else available? I mean, I don't want to start reading Time Magazine now any more than I stopped reading it 20 years ago. But
that doesn't change anything. If you're already paying for the Wall Street Journal for the online edition, first of all, either you're going to be crazy to then decide you want to pay another $17.
I'm going to be crazy. In the first 2 months,
that's weird. And
I'm going to be crazy.
But I get it online and I get it in print. I get them. That's my deal. Is I get both of those.
Yeah,
right?
I stopped doing that.
I am not going to pay another. I'm not going to pay another $17 to get the iPad version. I'm just going to log into the Wall Street Journal using my existing logon.
I think that it's going to cannibalize for a small but very significant, highly targeted group of readers. It's going to cannibalize the electronic edition, and certainly the free edition, which Murdoch is trying to obliterate in any case.
I think that I don't understand what you're saying. I think what it may do is make paper redundant. Because I was thinking to myself whether to buy one of these things, and the only time that I would need the physical paper is on an aeroplane, but then I assume you can download the thing before you go on an aeroplane.
Mm-hmm.
Well, typically when I go on a flight, I buy both the Times and the Journal.
Okay, so
regardless of what I have on
but I think what this thing will probably do, if it's going to be a big deal, is make paper redundant, because there's no reason to have it anymore.
Agreed.
But then the broader question is, will it? I think what it will also do is make newspapers, especially high-end newspapers, more like niche products. I don't think it's going to broaden their business model. It will just define it for the future, which will make it a small, high-end business. But it's never going to make it a broad mass basis anymore.
But again, the idea of market making is to control the marketplace. And right now, I don't see anybody that's going to come along, with the possible exception of TechCrunch in a certain part of that market, that is going to control this international or national online newspaper. It's going to be controlled by the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. It is right now.
Well, no, it's
why?
No, I mean,
it's I spend.
Why?
This is just my editorial judgment.
Well, you're wrong, though. You're just plain wrong. Look at if anyone dominates.
I was plain wrong about the iPhone thing. That's not going to work either.
You're wrong. You just got.
Remember how the iPhone wasn't going to work? That AT&T has got shitty service and all this bullshit.
You're speaking in a very parochial way. I mean, if there is a true online international newspaper, it's the Guardian, or as Kevin says, the Economist.
You're betting against. You're betting against Steve Jobs.
Down and says, "I want." Where's my international newspaper, and which is the one I'm going to have? I think people, if they're going to get, first of all, the big problem is you got people who say don't even think they want a newspaper, right? They're not thinking, and the trend is not. I've got to find one newspaper that puts it all together.
Again,
for me. The
Danny,
trend has been
you're talking about.
I'm going to find something that aggregates the good stuff from all over the place.
You're talking about reaching out and expanding a market which is right now forming. I understand what your perspective is about new users, but I'm not talking about new users. I'm talking about the cream of the existing user base, the ones that have the most, lead gen basically surrounding them in terms of, signal to noise and what they can do with this information, particularly when it's in real time. That's a very powerful market, and it is going to be controlled by the iPad, at least for 3 to 6 months. There's not going to be a competitor here.
Yeah, but who cares? I mean, we started out as like, is the iPad going to be this revolutionary thing that's going to save newspapers? And if the revolutionary thing is,
I didn't start out that way. That's what the common chat is about on the network.
So the common chat, if you look at this, unlikely. I mean, one thing from the discussion that we're having to me says, yeah, really unlikely now, because at best you get a lot of tech adopters, high-tech adopters or whatever, early adopters, who probably already take a newspaper, who decide, yeah, I'll spend extra money to take it on the iPad as well, or I'll shift from one thing to the other. Although most of those people, I think, are going to say, if I got an online version, I'm just going to log in online, unless the iPad is stupid enough and the Wall Street Journal is stupid enough to prevent me from using my existing logon. But what you really want for saving newspapers is to either change the habits or attract a new audience to them. So what is the iPad going to do that's going to cause the New York Times to suddenly get a whole lot more new people? And I don't know what that is.
Again, I understand your argument about new people. I don't think we're at new people. I mean, we're at T-minus 8 days and counting. We got 0 people using this thing right now.
So you're saying this is a substitution thing, right? This is you're
I'm not saying it's a substitution
they're going to cannibalize their existing market base by selling it to them, and they'll be reading it on this shiny new toy that they will spend money on, rather than reading it on the existing web browsers and things they already have.
This is a battle for in the old days when there was a record business. Remember records? Music. Okay.
They're still trying to destroy the internet in the UK. Yeah,
exactly. The way it worked is that the audience of people from, say, 13 to 30 that grew out of the album-oriented radio, which was underground radio, which expanded. In other words, when it became less of a singles market and more of a record audience, the discretionary income of the people who were buying records, there was a pool of maybe 6 records a month that they were capable of buying. So they had to go out and make a choice. And so all of the major acts would release around the same period of time in order to be able to get in line and get ahead and basically shut out the rest of the marketplace. So you had the Stones and the Who and the Beatles, et cetera, and they blew out the marketplace, transformed the record business, and created an environment where this kind of content was a significant part of the discretionary expenditures on the part of that audience, which grew to be the largest audience in history. That's where we are today. This is the beginning of the record business all over again. Now, whether or not this is going to save newspapers or not, I think that Danny's point, and I think all of us probably agree, that newspapers are not going to be saved because nobody cares about them in terms of that model. They care about being informed as quickly as possible and getting access to authoritative content as quickly as possible so that they can make decisions about whether it's in their interest or not. And that's why we have these new nodes like TechCrunch and Danny Sullivan and various other kinds of people, and even Andrew Keene, who has an authority of a certain type. Who we rely upon to sift through the wheat and the chaff of what's available, as Danny calls it, for free on the network. I don't think it's free on the network. I think it's expensive to figure out what's useful and what isn't. And so the major media players who have a clue, I think personally that the New York Times product, particularly in the tech space, has expanded rapidly over the last 6 months. And it's a valuable product. It's not as valuable as many of the things that are on TechCrunch or other nodes, but it is certainly a lot less clueless than it was a year ago, when they were trying to figure out how to be able to survive in this marketplace and were basically selling off rental to their building in order to be able to stay in it. So, whether this is going to save them or not is irrelevant. Who is going to maintain the ability to be able to sell into related markets sufficient to be able to expand and survive the shakeout that this device, I think, will trigger? Okay, well, I guess we're done.
Well, I'm just, I think this thing is going to be a great thing to browse the web on, and the idea that I'm going to buy an app to read each particular newspaper is a black hole of silliness. I already browse the web all the time on this thing, which is my Droid, which has a screen the third the size of the iPad, but actually happens to fit in my pocket, and I can read very comfortably on because it's got a really crisp display. And I'm finding that I'm reading more and more on this and less on the computer. And paper.
And that's also true of the the iPhone versus the Nexus One. Although Nexus One has a somewhat buggy interface, and its touch screen controls are ephemeral at best. Nonetheless, the display for my aging eyes, I can read more comfortably over a longer period of time. So it is, in fact, a placeholder for me while I wait for the iPad.
Sure. But I think, for me, the iPad, I'm not sure it's in the sweet spot yet. I think it's too big for the number of pixels it has. But that's...
Yeah, but I remember that to me that was a nitpick when you said it, on the day of the announcement. Relative to the overall dynamics of the product.
No,
Danny, were you saying something? You froze up, so we just brought you back.
Steve, this is Robert.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the discussion of the newspaper thing that I've been listening to is misplaced because I don't think I'm going to read. I don't think I'm going to read a magazine or go to a magazine site that often or a newspaper site. What I do want on this, and the reason I'm buying it is for my couch, I'm going to read feeds on it. I'm going to read Facebook and Twitter and Buzz, and those feeds are going to bring me the news, and then I'm going to try to click on the headlines just like I do in Tweety, and if the headline doesn't work and I want that content, then I'm going to pay a little bit of right there. I'm going to say, hey, I want that article. So if these newspapers really thought through how to do a micro format or a payment plan or just unlock your subscription for a month the way the New York Times does, I would probably pay it for some things. I'm not sure I would pay it for a lot of things, just like I don't pay it for a lot of things on Twitter right
now. We're just dealing with the stream being down. Well, I disagree with you. Let's just hold for 1 second while I try and get this back up.
Well, all right. I'll disagree with myself, I guess.
No, just hang on.
Just argue with yourself.
Ted, I saw the Wired magazine prototype that will be shipped on the iPad, and it looks cool, but I just don't see reading that many magazines in that format anymore. I'm a feed reader, and most of my friends and my wife read feeds. She reads Facebook, and her friends bring her the news and tell her, oh, there's a great video you got to watch, or there's a great article in the New Yorker, or in the San Jose Mercury News that you got to pay attention to. I'm not so sure. I think I'm starting to agree with Andrew Keene, which is really weird. But that hey, if I
why is that weird? Why does everyone always say that?
Because you're usually wrong. But but in this case, I think you're right. I've given up the San Jose Mercury News, and I'm not so sure that I'm going to be very likely to get back into subscribing to the San Jose Mercury News just because they have a pretty iPhone version.
But you're confusing the brand identification and its delivery mechanism with the people and the teams that put out these kinds of publications. During the recent healthcare reform debate, there were basically 3 or 4 nodes that you could go to on television or on the internet. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, I'll leave that alone, and C-SPAN for direct coverage, and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and then the Huffington Post and some of the blogosphere content. Now, Each of
Yeah,
those,
but
each of
I was
those.
watching Twitter, and I got all that news.
Yeah, but you
in real
didn't
time
get
on
you
Twitter.
didn't get what I was looking for, which was after the first rush of news, like, how many votes, what's happening, is it going to happen? You don't get the context that's provided by political reporters who understand how Washington works and are also being used
I disagree.
and are also
I
being
got
used.
linked.
Robert, it's not an either or conversation here. I'm not suggesting that Twitter is an unimportant part of the delivery mechanism for these
No, but
pieces
all
of
those people
information.
are on Twitter,
But
first
Twitter
of all.
does
all,
not.
All of the political.
Twitter
all of
does
the
not.
political, people are on Twitter.
Yeah,
All
but
the
they don't.
political brands are on
They
Twitter.
don't. There are very few nodes that have sprung up around Twitter as a way of incentivizing and creating that content that they're generating. They have, long careers. They have very elaborate
I know, but all the
teams
career
of
Are on
people.
Twitter. They were
They have.
all on Twitter.
They have
and
very.
And if they weren't, Steve, if they
It's
weren't,
like saying
my friends brought
they
them.
all use pieces of paper and pencils, for Christ's sake. Twitter is not an editorial entity. It is a backbone message bus for the internet that most signaling is now done on, as opposed to through the RSS channel that preceded it.
Right.
This is not an either-or conversation. What I am saying to you, however, is the very people who are really good at synthesizing and summarizing and extending and influencing the news and events are going to continue to have a loud voice in this architecture. And over time, this iPad device is going to help them get paid for that. And so it's going to have a major impact.
Right. I'm just saying I'm not going to pay for a news brand up front. I'm going to pay for it when my friends signal to me that it's important. If the New York Times wants to charge me, I'll only pay after my friends tell me the New York Times is important to pay for. And so I'm going to find my news on Twitter. Or on Facebook for normal people, but Twitter for me. Or Buzz if they ever fix their problems and give me some noise filtering. But I'm going to watch these streams in front of the TV at night, and the streams are going to signal to me what is important, because I'm watching 18,000 people, and they're smart people. I've all hand-added them, and they tell me where to go get the news. During the healthcare thing, they were telling me everywhere to go, where to find the facts, who had the best synopsis of what this actually means, where to watch. I asked people what's the best place to watch the proceedings, and dozens of people said mostly C-SPAN. And some people even included the link to a live C-SPAN on the website. I just clicked on it and I started watching it. That's how I find the news now. I don't go to C-SPAN. I'm not going to pay for C-SPAN, or I'm not going to pay for the New York Times, not up front. I will if the crowd, if my friends and the crowd tells me this is good stuff and you need to know it, and then I'll sample it, and then if it's good and I want the rest of it, I'm going to pay for it. But the argument is just the form. I am going to pay for news. I'm not going to buy the Wired magazine anymore. I think those days are over.
Well, I agree with you there. I haven't bought Wired magazine ever. But, I go on a plane.
I know, but they were on stage at 10.
But I go on a plane.
Like cool looking.
I go on a plane, and, and I'm rushing to get on a plane. I don't have anything to read, which is increasingly not true because they have Wi-Fi now. But I go on a plane, and I'll grab a Wired. After next Wednesday, next Saturday, I'm going to go on a plane. I'm not going to buy it in the coffee shop. I'm going to buy it directly on the plane, whether I buy it with the web version or not.
I've already had that experience I've had that experience with my Kindle. I sit down next to somebody who has a Kindle or who has a book, and I ask them what the book's about, and is it a good book? And if they're halfway through, they know whether it's a good book or not. and they say, yeah, this is an awesome book. You should read it. And I buy it, and in a minute, I'm reading the same book. You know?
Exactly.
I totally expect to have that same experience with the iPad, you know, sitting next to people when I finally get my 3G version. I'm going to buy 2 of them. One's going to be just for the couch, for casual gaming, for control of TV experience, and for streaming, watching the streams, watching Facebook and Twitter and Buzz and
what we're having here is a discussion not unlike the one about the iPad itself as a device, which is it doesn't have flash, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. How many are you getting? 2. So now we're talking about it doesn't do this. I don't need this. I'm getting all my information through Twitter. How many of these things are going to be published? Which are going to be the leading the 10 sales of software or content on the iPad after 2 months? And I'll bet you that the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times will be in the top 10, probably number 2 and number 3.
I'll take that bet.
If they're in the top 2 or 3 of sales, it's because of the positioning.
Absolutely.
And then that doesn't help. That doesn't help anything else in the industry.
No,
and that's not a that's not a long-term solution. And that's not a long-term solution for the publishing industry as a whole.
I completely agree with you. I
completely
completely agree with you, Danny. It is not a long-term solution.
And in fact, if they are, and it'll be interesting to see if they hold on to it in the long term as well, because I can see a lot of people saying, I can remember like when you would buy your computer and there was nothing to play on it. Like, you know, everybody had that stupid After Dark screensaver with the fish because it was like one of the 3 apps that we had to run. You didn't need it.
Okay, so
people got it because they had some disposable income to go with.
2 arguments, Danny. Number 1, I completely agree with you. That's my first argument. My second argument is, why do people at the Indianapolis 500 risk their lives to get pole position?
Hello?
They go faster than their car should go. It's a very dangerous time, the time trials, in order to get pole position. They do it because there are benefits throughout the race from having that kind of position at the beginning of a shift. That's why, you know, when you say that they're doing this, they're going to have that momentum because of their positioning. Yes, they are. They have very large corporations. I mean, what's the name of Fox? News Corp. News Corp has enormous assets in this country and globally in terms of its media penetration and its ability to affect, you know, governments and you know, all sorts of things. They not only are going to have that kind of position, they're going to be able to drive that in many other ways. One of the reasons that they are such a powerful play here is because they are diversified across medias, which are now coming online for this device, like film, video, television.
If you come back to the whole hype, or is it hype about the iPad, so what? If the Wall Street Journal actually turns into being the top paying app on the iPad, and then Murdoch wants to run around and say, aha, see, I've proven people will pay for news content. No, he hasn't. He's proven that people will pay for one news content type of thing.
Why are we arguing about the...
That's not going to save the Los Angeles Times. That's not going to save the Des Moines Register.
No, it's not. I don't think anything is going to save either the Los Angeles Times or the Des Moines Register.
I mean,
but there's going to be nodes.
And I'll put it to you this way. Murdoch has liked to talk about the idea. I think he's talked about the idea as, well, the internet user or the net Neanderthal or whatever treats the internet as if it's all free cable, and they don't want to buy any of the premium channels. And we're going to change that. And you know what? Yeah, you are going to probably change that. You are going to get your Showtimes. You're going to get the HBOs that have such compelling content that people will pay for that. But most of the rest of that, it's not going to get paid for. The iPad's not going to change that. Not from anything that we've seen or heard, or I've seen or heard so far.
Okay, so
down the line,
my argument is
whatever.
My argument is that I totally agree with you that statement that you just made. No, it's not going to change. But there are other players that are going to draft off of these initial strategies, and they're going to do two things. They're going to both be web aware and intelligent about their use of resources. They're not going to have to amortize, and they're not going to have to cross some enormous chasm like Microsoft or even Google has to in terms of rationalizing revenue models that are going to be disrupted by this new type of audience and this new type of content that's going to emerge. And to pigeonhole this as being saving the existing content models versus nothing, that it's all going to go to free, I think that's just it's sophistry of the highest order. You had Steve Ballmer at your conference. How did that happen?
But I think
that get them to come out. But I'm not saying it's all going to go to free. What I'm saying is, I think you've got a lot of publishers that are assuming that the iPad is somehow going to save their asses for the declining circulation revenue that they've had.
Well, I don't know if they
I think
assume,
they're probably going to look at people who may buy the Wall Street Journal and say, "Oh, well, great, we're Wired. We're going to get people to pay us $12 per month for it." And I think the reality is, you're probably going to find people who say, "You know what? I like Wired so much, I'm willing to pay you $10 per year." Which is what I might pay, which it is what I pay per year here for me on the newsstand. And that's still going to have a lot of adjustments that are going to go with it. What I think would be the real kind of revolutionary thing that would happen is if I'm reading and I'm looking at my Twitter feed, or I'm getting my RSS feed, or I'm just reading my email on the iPad, and one of my friends says, "Hey, you got to check out this article," and I click on the link, and it takes me over to some news publication, and the news publication says, "This is a great article, but to read it further, it's going to cost you 20 cents. Enter your iTunes password here." That would be revolutionary. I mean, iPhone. One of the things I find with the whole application ecosystem that's out there is they're like $1. I don't think twice about buying something for $1. It's more worth my time to debate whether or not I'm going to pay the $1 for that application than to try it out and see what it's going to go with.
Exactly right. I spent $2. I spent $2 to get the CNN iPhone app so that I could watch the victorious press conference, which wasn't being carried on any of the news channels, on my iPhone. It was a no-brainer.
And I think the challenge is then, what do you do as a news publisher to turn some of your content into an app? Or at least put it into the thing that people think, "Oh, yeah, I'll buy that. I want to get that and go with it from there."
Well, now you're talking. So when you say...
And I don't think the news...
Go ahead. Now you're talking, and when you say that these newspapers, unnamed newspapers, are going to put 1 and 3 together and think that because the Wall Street Journal can survive with some sort of model, that means they're going to survive. If they were smart enough to listen to what you just said, they'd be a lot further ahead of the game than making that analysis that you were talking about that is ridiculous, which is that somehow this is about saving the newspaper business. I mean, Stephen Pickering, I just noticed in the chat, said something to the effect that magazines will work and newspapers won't. What's the difference between a magazine and a newspaper, number one? And what's the difference between a daily newspaper in a real-time environment where there is no such thing as a daily newspaper? By the time it's considered to be daily, it's already dead.
Can I say something?
Yeah, and then Robert, after you, Robert. Go ahead, Andrew.
I think that we're assuming certain things which are wrong, which has to do... Clearly, the old mass media industry is finished, right? It's fragmented, it's gone away, and it will never be resurrected. What you're seeing, I think...
Tell that to Comcast.
I'm telling you, I don't care about Comcast.
Comcast On Demand is not only not going away, it's a freight train of a...
I thought we were talking about newspapers.
400 million customers.
Okay, well, let me finish.
Uh-huh.
You're trying to be too Socratic, and you have to keep quiet for a few minutes now.
Yes, Daddy. Love being talked down to by the former monopoly.
And I work for Comcast, and I know everything you're doing. So seriously, what's happening is that with the iPad, I think, you're seeing the beginnings of a new model for for publishing, which will be high-end niche publishing. That's the Apple model, which clearly is viable, and they've been very successful over the last 25 years. Simultaneously, you have the Google model of free content, schleppy, mass-produced, piracy, blah, blah, blah. And those two things will coexist.
Now, which one do you think? Are you in favor of which one of those models?
I'm not interested in what I'm in favor of.
Okay, so you're in favor of both of those models.
No, let me finish. Stop talking.
Hey, Scoble, does this sound like you?
After you drive me to become like Scoble. They're both realities, and one does not preclude the other. We're seeing the appearance of a sort of a bifurcated Scoble, not Scoble, that was a Freudian slip, Google Apple world, which are entirely different, a high-end, quality, paid content world of a kind of elite, which we're all part of, and the masses which will get the schleppy free crap, Wikipedia. That's the end of it. I'll be quiet now.
Okay, Robert?
Somebody was pointing out that there's no difference between magazines and newspapers. There is in some way. If you look at the New Yorker magazine, for instance, it has extremely long, really well-written articles, and you could give a sampling of that article and get somebody hooked for the rest of it. Newspapers, on the other hand, like the USA Today, usually writes in a story format that's about 10 column inches, and usually you can get all the facts about the story by reading only the first 3 paragraphs, because that's how journalists are trained. It's called inverted pyramid writing, and that's going to be really hard to sell in a 20-cent per article that you're going to read kind of format, which is the world I believe we're moving toward. This Twitter world, this streaming, activity streams world, that the stream is going to come down my iPad and somebody's going to tell me to read or look at this video or listen to this podcast. This Gillmor Gang might get recommended to 15 people around the world, right? And those 15 people will see their friends telling them to click on this Gillmor Gang and listen to it. Well, we could actually let people listen to 10 minutes of it and then come on and say, hey, are you hooked? Do you want to listen to the rest of it? It'll cost you $1. And by that time, people might be really engaged in the content that we're producing and want to listen on further, and we'll pay the $1. But if you're only writing a 10-column inch story like USA Today does, there's not that opportunity to hook people to get them to stick around for more content. That's one thing. The other difference between newspaper and magazine, newspaper, what we think of as newspaper is news, which means that it has a very high time value. In other words, the content itself, the value of the content decreases every minute after it gets published, right? And where the New Yorker, I can read a New Yorker from 5 years ago, and it still has the same value it had the day it was published. It's evergreen in the industry's parlance, and so that format, that evergreen content, great writing, entertaining writing, fiction or more documentary style things have value that goes on for a long time and has a chance to gain an audience over time. I remember meeting the producer of We Live in Public, and she's the only person who's Andy Timiner. She's the only person who's won 2 Sundance Film Festival awards, and her movie has just as much value today as when I saw it a year ago. And so if I tell everybody to watch it, in the Twitter stream, that would have a chance of gathering another $1 or $2 from a group of new people who haven't seen that movie. Where if it's news is only valuable right now. The Sharks won the playoff, or Sharks won the game last night. Tomorrow, that ain't going to be worth anything.
Well, that's sometimes true. I'll give you an example of when that's not true. There's a photograph of John Edwards on a plane, a campaign plane, with in the background there's this blonde woman who turns out to be the mother of his most recent child. and I believe that either you took that picture or it was somebody standing next to you who took that picture. Now that had that had some news value at the time, and in retrospect, it had a tremendous amount of news value. I'll give you another example that's similar to that. A great rock photographer, Jim Marshall, died yesterday, or the day before, or something like that. And you know, he's known for some very iconic pictures of like Hendrix setting his guitar on fire at Monterey Pop Festival, and Janis Joplin with a bottle of Wild Kentucky or whatever it is, Wild Turkey, and there's one picture that, in retrospect, has a lot more significance than it did before, which is a picture of the Beatles leaving the field at Candlestick Park after their last concert. Now, Jim Marshall was given access. He was the only photographer allowed backstage with the Beatles. The only people who knew that this was the Beatles' last conference were the Beatles. They had decided to. So there's this one classic picture. First of all, there's this wide-angle picture of them leaving, and Lennon is looking at the camera like, okay, this is it. And there's a picture of Lennon back in the dressing room, sort of slumped over, sort of sitting there, very contemplative, and you can see, you know, the world of weariness on his shoulders. He's just looking at the camera. It's not a great photograph, but in retrospect, it has incredible resonance. So, you know, if you abstract that,
how do we you know, those kinds of things, those kinds of human moments and stories, and they do have evergreenness, and they will keep coming through our stream as human history changes the perspective. You know, that picture that I took of John Edwards and his mistress wouldn't have reappeared if he hadn't have cheated on his wife, right?
Well, you didn't know that it was his mistress, and nobody else did
either. I had
either.
no clue.
Right.
No.
So what I'm saying is that the difference between these things that, you know, you click once and then a year or 30 years later they suddenly take on some different resonance, that's not in and of itself going to be a content stream that's going to make this something special. But there are all of the nuances on the margins of these kinds of things that are going to create creative and editorial experiences that are going to do two things. And this is where I think that Danny and I, you know, are coming at the same point from very different places. The initial spark of this, I mean, if you look at the history of music in terms of the 60s and, you know, the explosion of creativity that started with Miles Davis in the early 60s and late 50s and continued through, you know, arguably till the day that the Beatles quit. But, you know, we can not go there to make the point. There was definitely, you can see in retrospect that collecting all those people together in an event called Woodstock triggered the notion that this was something more than just a bunch of rock groups getting high. And over the years, we've seen this kind of movements. The most recent example of that is the election when Obama, it felt like a rock concert. It felt like Woodstock when he won the election and was on stage in Chicago. You know, these kinds of events, they start somewhere and they're triggered by changes and shifts in the delivery mechanism. You know, Kennedy was the first television president. Obama may be the first Twitter president.
Listening to you, I just had an impulse that it's not going to be the newspaper industry that the iPad saves, although it might help. It's the music industry, because all of a sudden I had an impulse to get the old liner notes and the original covers of the albums. You know, that's what I'll pay for. The MP3, give that to me for free, but I want the lyrics and the liner notes and the album covers. And now that we have a big enough screen, that actually matters.
I agree. I mean, it's album sized as opposed to CD sized. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
All right. Danny, any thoughts?
Anyways, I'm at Pitio right now. I gotta run and find out what these guys are going to do. For
All right.
the
Well,
iPad.
we're going to wind it up. So I'll let what you just said function as your last thoughts. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye.
Danny.
Last thoughts on the iPad?
Well, you know, or whatever you want to talk about. But I just wanted to sort of bring this full circle.
I think the hard thing is, whatever we predict, we won't. I mean, it sounds stupid to say, but we're not going to know anything until we actually see how people use it and how things get going and how things are actually positioned. I do think that the publishers who assume that this is somehow going to revolutionarily save their hides are mistaken. I think that there's still a lot of challenges that they're going to face. I still find it amazing too that when I was reading something about the Wall Street Journal was already selling advertisers on being in the iPad version, it's like, okay, so you're selling advertisers to be in there and you're going to make the revenue, and yet you've been telling us that online apparently you don't make enough money off the advertising in a lot of ways. So I don't know, it gives them a new platform to play with. We'll see, but I still in a lot of ways feel like it is basically still the web, and we're still going to be browsing the web on it, and a lot of the content we'll consume will be basically web content. So I don't know that the rules are necessarily going to be that different.
Well, I agree with everything you said as usual, but I would extend the thought to say that if you have a flattened experience between what we call the web and what we call the old stream media, and they start to interact in a more fluid and enjoyable way, there are going to be winners that emerge from this that are going to be maybe some, hybrid of both of these things, and I would say that is the thing. I mean, when you say that we can't really figure out what's going to happen until it happens, I mean, you do a lot of prognostication about search and render your opinion on these things, and you don't seem to be limited by the extent of talking about the future as though you know what's going to happen. So why wouldn't you be able to say that about the iPad?
With search, actually, I don't tend to make a lot of predictions. I mean, there were some things that I've
you have editorial comments about
technologies. And I mean, with search, I've tended to say, look, we're going to have blended results. You're going to have things like personalization come in. Those things have come along. But things like real-time results, I couldn't have predicted we would have real-time results because I didn't know that we were going to have Twitter.
Okay.
Which was powering. So it's difficult to say, well, I know where this is all going to go when there are going to be things that happen that we don't even know exist.
Well, I don't think that any of us knew that we were going to have Twitter. I think we were all blindsided by that, but I think we all knew that everything about our computer experience as it's moved from the mainframe to the desktop and now to the pocket and to the hand has been all about extending the ability to be able to remain and connected and be able to broadcast essentially from wherever we are.
But I guess so. What I do tend to do in search is rather than a lot of predicting, it's a lot of either debunking some predictions that go out there and diffusing a lot of the hype that I tend to see. And I've seen a lot of that in search over the ages where you're like, yeah, that's not going to happen, and this is why. And all you need to do is look at the kind of behavior and look at what people are talking about is supposedly going to change, and it doesn't add up. So when I look at the iPad, I can't predict some of the new things that may happen that can completely change it. I don't know if, like with Facebook, I don't think Facebook thought, oh gosh, one of the big things we're going to have are going to be all these games everybody's going to be playing where vampires are biting you and you're farming something. I don't think they predicted that was going to be the case. So, but what I can do when I look at the iPad is think, all right, we know how people are consuming media now in terms of especially newspapers and magazines. We know what they seem to be willing to pay for or not. We also can understand that at some point your pocketbook is empty. There's a limited number of things you can pay for. I can't remember who did this. It may have been Gizmodo or Engadget, but they said it was a great chart. They're like, there's only so much stuff we can subscribe to. Here I've got Verizon at $60 a month and my AT&T phone, and I got my Comcast going over here. It's like, where do you think I'm getting the extra money to squeeze in this additional stuff? And so when you look at all that, I think it says, you know, if people are willing to pay, if people are not wanting to pay for a lot of this media offline, just because you have an iPad does not mean they're going to suddenly want to pay a lot of subscriptions fee for it in the same way. And so that's why I come back to looking at this thinking the publishing industry can't assume that this is somehow a magic device that's going to suddenly bring in tons and tons of more paid subscription income. Well, it may help. There's some opportunities. There's new things coming along, but I don't think that's just going to be the big solution for them.
But I think that, you know, part of the problem in this, you know, in framing this discussion as being about what a large group of media people think is what's going to happen or not, is that if they don't know what they're talking about, then we're arguing about something that we don't even think is possible, like that this is going to save publishing. This isn't going to save publishing any more than it's going to destroy publishing. Publishing's going to do just fine. It's what's going to...
I should say that I never, for example, newspapers may die, journalism will not, and people often get those things confused. So is this going to save journalism as performed by reporters in a newsroom sitting in, you know, Seattle or Des Moines or Los Angeles? Probably not. There are other changes that are going along. We're going to lose big dailies in certain cities. That we're going to have a consolidation of the industry. Will it kill newspaper-style journalism, or will it save it? I don't think that the web was going to be killing that. I just think that we were going to have much more consolidation. You're going to have smarter reporters. You're going to have changes in how things will happen. So, but is the iPad going to suddenly cause it so that the decline in newspaper reading that we've been seeing will cease? No. I don't think that'll be the case at all.
No, but I think it will cause a merging of the newer models and the older models into a much more flexible and economically sound model.
I'll say, sadly, the newspaper industry measures its health by subscriber revenues and by circulation numbers. And we keep seeing these charts that tell you how the circulation has declined over time, and it's just never been so miserable. The problem with those charts is you could probably say that more news content has been consumed at this point than ever before. I'd love to see somebody go through it, see if they can figure it out, but I would suspect that that would be the case because so many people are online and so many people read news content online. It's not the newspaper circulation is actually down. Newspaper circulation is probably way up. They have tons and tons of readers. Google sends them millions of readers every day. They just don't monetize it that well.
I completely agree. You know, before email, my writing skills, such as they were completely dormant. The last paper that I had to write in college was Liberation Day for me. I had no intention of writing another anything for a very long time. But as we moved into the email generation, you know, it empowered everybody to start writing again. And you know, I think that what we're going to see here is a similar, you know, flowering as I think Robert intuits. I wouldn't call it the music business anymore, but it's going to be something. The creative arts, I think, are going to flourish as a result of this transport, simply because of what you said at the start of the show, which is that this is going to be, you know, a pleasurable experience. I don't think you were talking about the iPad, but I am. Andrew, so final thoughts? Andrew, can you hear me?
I think, yeah, I can hear you. I think you're wrong in the you're sort of McLuhanite. You think that this is going to lead to some sort of global culture, and I strongly disagree. I think that what this will result in, for better or worse, I'm not sure if it is for better or worse, is a fragmentation of the culture. I think that the iPad is an important event. I think it will result in the flowering of a certain kind of high-end monetizable culture, but it will be for a small, narrow elite of people like ourselves. So
what is different about that? That already exists. So why?
No,
is that
it didn't exist in the mass media world. Everyone watched television, or everyone, you know, with your heroes, the Beatles. Everyone bought the same record. When the White Album came out, or when Abbey Road came out, millions of people flocked into the streets, into the stores, to buy the same plastic product at the same price. That no longer exists and will probably never happen again. And I think the products like the iPad, the irony of the internet is that everyone believed it would lead to a more globalized culture. And actually the reverse is true. It's leading to an increasingly parochial culture, an increasingly unequal one, where the old world, the mass industrial world, was much more global than the one that we're experiencing.
But
it doesn't mean that well, let me finish. It doesn't mean that we can't, you and I, and a Scoble, have friends in China or India, but that's not a global culture.
Well, I think it's cobblers. I think the difference is that there isn't a floor on the scale. You know, we have Lady Gaga with 1 billion video views this week, which
she's fantastic.
Probably outranks
Lady Gaga. You know,
the number of the Beatles god.
Well, no, but she's a phenomenon because you know, she's sort of like Madonna 2.0. I mean, she's unbelievable. Sure. Yeah,
exactly. But the point is, you know, that's one end of the scale, and the other end of the scale is, you know, small artists playing in clubs that can now put stuff on the internet and have that propagate as well.
Yeah, well, I think
they don't have to go through.
I think that's nonsense. These small groups are going to somehow bubble up.
You're expecting the Wall, because of this new technology product, the iPad, which is, I think, is going to be a great product. You're expecting the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times to become a global newspaper.
No,
so you're
they already
into
are.
That trap.
They already are. And I take your point about the Financial Times. I think the Financial Times is equally, and the BBC for that matter, and CNN. These global brands are going to continue to emerge. But you know, if you take a look at the United States cable network news networks, they have descended. Talk about parochialism. They've descended into this, you know, comedy of left, right. You know, going after. Andrew, could you like?
I think that there's 2 or 3 things happening simultaneously.
I can't hear you, mostly because you just were using your computer like a scratch turntable. Thank you.
A couple of things going on simultaneously. There's the debate about pay and paywalls. And then there's these new devices, and they are connected. I think that the iPad will be an ideal platform device to sell high-quality, handmade content.
Just like FM radio and stereos, like the KLH stereo system in the 60s, which launched a music business that I don't know what 1,000th percentile of the initial record business, it blew off the charts. That was a global market. A difference. Primarily.
I see your point, and maybe you have a point, but I think there's a difference between now and the 60s. Today there is this idea that culture should be free. Most consumers reject the notion of paying for culture, and I don't think that the iPad, however high the quality of the products on it, will actually change that.
I think that's true either. I think people will pay for culture as a mark of their respect. They'll buy the thing to show their support, and we see that with, if you want a recent example, the UK Christmas #1 thing, where people were buying things as a statement of, I want to buy this thing rather than that thing. We see it with artists like Zoe Keating, who says people buy multiple copies of her album because they like her and want to show their support that way. So if you're generating something people like, they'll be willing to pay you to continue doing it. And I think we're going to see more of that over time. Another example, but it propagates back and forth between the web media and the mass media. You see the same thing. The music phenomenon of the last years has been American Idol and Pop Idol in general, and that model of how do we use the mass media to bring the small guy up to the big thing. But at the same time, in parallel, we're seeing things like that don't have a single winner, that have lots of people out there being able to create stuff and share it with each other and come up with some way of generating some revenue from it, and some not. So I don't think it's as cut and dried as you were saying about there being a global culture or not. I think people have always been able to leap to a sort of mass fame from a small beginning, but there are many more routes to do it now than there were before.
All right. Well, I can hear children talking sotto voce about other things, so we're going to let the world continue to turn, and I'm extremely.
And next week, can I just say something? I thought that the most interesting piece written in the whole week was Danny's piece about Google and China. I think it's a much more interesting discussion than the iPad.
Yeah,
That was-
and,
that
and
was
how come you
Rebecca's
didn't
very
bring
good
it
too.
up? What was so interesting about it? So, as a preface,
Well, I thought it was a very, very good critical piece about Google and their attitude towards China. He cut through a lot of the crap. So maybe next week we can get Danny on China and Google.
Okay, and we'll watch it.
I might
on,
be censored, but we'll see.
but
You will be if Steve's involved.
on Saturday,
You might
we'll-
be in the UK if they pass the digital economy bill.
whatever it is, we'll be on Saturday. We'll be able to watch it on the iPad. So, this is
I'm not
Steve.
going to buy. I would never buy one without the 3G. Who would ever buy one without the 3G? They'd be mad.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, I got one.
you'd be mad,
I'll tell you why.
Andrew. You'd be mad to.
I totally got it without the 3G
Why?
because I'm going to just use
Does
it
it have
at home.
Wi-Fi?
And because
Yeah,
you
but
know
why
what,
is when
In
you're
like
at the
6 months-
airport or you're in a
because-
cab? Why would you?
No, because in 6 months they're gonna. I don't have it with the 3G because in 6 months they're gonna. Well, a couple things. 6 months they're gonna release one where hopefully I can plug in my USB stick from Verizon and just use the damn thing. Right? They're always upgrading this. So I was like, you know what? I want one now, and I'm already not really wanting it that bad because I know it's gonna be a better one. But I'll throw in a little bit of money and do it. Secondly. Well, hell, I'm probably going to move to one of the little MiFi things where I've got my USB, where it puts out its own Wi-Fi wherever I want. So, that'll be my 3G. I don't need their 3G.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah,
fine.
you'll be doing Wi-Fi arbitrage. That's exactly it. There's
Well,
lots of little gadgets like that.
I'm not sure what that has to do with-
that was doing 4G to Wi-Fi that was working very nicely.
I'm not sure what that has to do with China, but I thought that was quite interesting what you just said, Danny. And we'll take it under advisement. Like we can talk about anything on this show at any time. All you have to do is stop rubbing
talking.
your laptop like it's a Ouija board and open your mouth and say it. This is Steve Gillmor. This has been the Gillmor Gang. I want to thank Andrew Keene, Kevin Marks, Robert
Thanks very
Scoble,
much.
Danny Sullivan. I want to thank Rackspace and particularly Rob Legess, without which this program would not be in the form you're seeing it, and certainly NewTek and their TriCaster, without whom this wouldn't even be broadcast. And I want to say thanks to everybody who showed up, and especially those who didn't, and we'll see you again next time on the iPad. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Right.